What I'm sharing today is a little bit of a historical perspective of a trend in immigrant education that is both exciting and concerning. What I want to demonstrate is the strange and interesting history of these programs designed specifically to educate immigrant teenagers. Usually these are called Newcomer or immigrant education programs. But before I do, I want to give you a little bit of a perspective on immigration in the United States. Immigration has changed what our country looks like in the last 120 years, and that's largely a product of policy. So these are really interesting because from 1880 to 1930, you can see that immigration, the numbers of immigrants in each of these places rose considerably. But between 1930 and 1970, those populations kind of stagnated. And this was because of a 1924 National Origins Act that significantly restricted immigration from any part of the world, basically, where people were not white. And it was able to do that by using 1980 census data to create quotas for who was allowed to immigrate to this country legally. After 1964, that changed considerably because the Immigration Act of this year abolished the quota system and again opened the borders to immigrants from Latin America and Asia. If you look at 2010, you can see that the demographics of this country have significantly changed. Today, immigrant youth comprise the fastest growing group of students in the United States. 1 in 4 children in the United States are either immigrants or one of their parents is an immigrant. This is up from 6% in 1970s. So obviously this is something that we should be thinking about in schools. When teenagers cross the border by themselves, they've likely migrated unaccompanied, experienced interruptions in schooling, endured prolonged separations from immediate family, and are usually poor, parentified, or undocumented. Approximately half of all immigrant students that come to the United States speak little to no English, and then half of all ELL students are also immigrants. So this is what's happening in the United States right now with immigrant education programs. Some school districts in the mid-1980s decided to respond to this demographic shift in unique ways. The first Newcomer program opened in 1985 in New York City. By 1990, 3 of these programs existed nationally. Between 1990 and 2000, 115 programs for immigrants opened in 196 sites in 29 states. This is according to a report by the Center for Applied Linguistics. So you can see that this program kind of took off. But what's really interesting is that between 2001 and 2011, when the Center for Applied Linguistics released a second study, was that most of these programs had dissipated by that time. In fact, only 25 remained when they looked back at these programs a second time. So why did these schools close? We're not really sure, but Short and Boyson, who did the Center for Applied Linguistics study, argued that it was probably in reaction to No Child Left Behind policies that made sure that every school, regardless of the number of English learners that they were serving, that they were held to the same standard as schools that were only serving English-speaking students. It set a requirement for learning English that we know from our studies of linguistics is impossible. They really demanded that students learn English in a year or schools would be punished. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why so many of these programs closed. They failed to make adequate yearly progress. So this is the current landscape of Newcomer programs. They're not going extinct, but they're evolving. So some school district leaders have discovered that by insulating these Newcomer programs within schools, they can avoid poor AYP evaluations while still attempting to address the needs of their newly arrived immigrant students. So we see that the 25 orange dots and the purple dots are from the 80s and 90s, but all of the yellow dots are programs that started after 2000. And you can see many of them are kind of concentrated in New York, around Washington, D.C., and then in Texas and California. Approximately 44 Newcomer programs have opened since 2000. Still, there is not a one set model for a newcomer program or one set description of what a newcomer actually is. Is it somebody who's been in the country for 6 months or 4 months or 4 years? That's something that is very, very unclear at this point in the literature. You might wonder why so many of these schools are focused in the New York City area. Well, these schools started there. This is home to one of the most well-studied networks of public schools that exclusively serve immigrants. The executive director, Claire Sylvan, of this network likes to tell people that the schools are highly selective in who they admit. She says students have to take a test to get in, but in our case, they have to fail it. They serve students who are in the bottom quartile of English language tests when they get to high school, and they've been in the country for fewer than 4 years. So this is one of the mission statements from the longest established high school in this network. And what I really want to focus on today, and what you can see in my one of the diagrams in my paper, is when you put the mission statements of some of these schools side by side, although they are newcomer schools and they serve immigrants, the intentions and the missions that these schools have, the goals and their ultimate outcomes, are quite different. So I'll let you look at this closer in the paper because the International Public Schools is what I wrote about mostly. But I think it's really important to note, particularly today, and I'll talk about why in just a second, that immigrants are settling or being resettled by the federal government in new places that aren't New York, that don't have the history of immigration. So this is Arkansas, Tennessee, and Georgia in 2000. This is 2010. What you can see in these maps is that these states have had 200 to 300% increases in their immigrant populations in the last decade. I added this slide today because I think it's really important to note that these are also the places where Syrian refugees are being resettled as well. And this was a New York Times headline today, that 50% of the governors in our country are saying that they won't accept them. So my point with this is that context matters. Time and place matter significantly. And although I'm still in the process of designing what a study for this that I find so interesting would look like, I really think that this is something important to pay attention to. And I also think it's important to know that 50% of the refugees coming from Syria are children. So this is something we need to be talking about. I'm going to skip this. So the schools that I'm going to talk about today are not the international schools that are located in New York, but there are 3 that have opened in the last 3 years in that sector of the country that I said we should be paying attention to. So these schools are located in Nashville, Jacksonville, and Alabama. They're the Newcomer Center at Point High, so again, insulated within a high school, the Duval Newcomer at Inglewood High, also situated at a public school, and the Newcomer Academy in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a charter school. What I wanted to talk about a little bit is what their mission statements reflect. And this is, again, just a very initial kind of conversation starter about what this might mean and what the intentions and goals of these programs might be. So in Nashville, the goal is to develop the English proficiency of each student so that they may re-enter the mainstream classroom. That's the first goal. In Duval, it's to ease the acculturation process and serve as a decompression changer or culture shock absorber. And in Birmingham, they will remain in the program until they attain a high enough level of English proficiency to return to their home school. So while the Internationals Network of Public Schools' mission is to retain the kids, make them feel comfortable in the country, teach English over a 4 to 7 year period in a contextualized environment, the missions that these schools have reflected different mentality about the importance of learning English in a short time and then going back into the mainstream one-size-fits-all classroom. So what I question is, when we look at these mission statements and the intentions of these programs, are they being created kind of with political ideologies in mind or politics of the area in mind, or are they being based on best practices? And if they are somewhere in between these two, what do those best practices look like? something interesting here, and I have lots of questions about it. But I'd like to know what you think as well. So thank you for your feedback and your input.